Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler. I'm feeling a bit hungry today, so we're going to discuss the much talked about film, The Menu. We'll see if I still have my appetite after this conversation. I was semi-aware of The Menu when it was released this past fall. I saw a trailer in it for the theater, in the movie theater, and it caught my attention, but I just never went back to it. But then I just started hearing so much about this movie, probably really like post-Christmas. I don't know if it's when it released on HBO Max, but it just seems to be a film that people have been mentioning to me. And one of those friends is my guest today, Todd Ferguson. How are you doing, Todd?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Are you doing all right?
I am.
Yeah. So, it was almost like you were the one that cemented that, like, I had to do this movie because, no offense to you, you're a very busy man. You have young children. And so, I was a little surprised that this was a movie that you saw. So, before we kind of discuss a little bit about the film itself, a little bit like what made you check this out?
First off, I love cooking. I love food. I would not say I'm at the I don't have a lot of experience at the high level of the restaurant world, eating at, very upscale, high culture restaurants, but I love food. I love cooking. I love cooking shows. I loved The Chef's Table, which influenced this movie. And then I saw a movie called The Menu, and honestly, I didn't know much about it. I knew it had a creepy element to it, but that's it. In the back of my mind, I was like, oh, I think I saw a preview for this, and it was somewhat creepy. That was all my experience. But I knew that I love food. I mean, like Julia and Julia, I love that movie. I love movies and shows about cooking and food. The Bear was a big series for me. And so I was like, you know what? Kids are in bed. I'm going to try it out. And I think I should have had more warning. But that was my experience. I just love food. I love cooking. I love thinking about the process. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to check it out.
Okay, so before we dive into all the details of this movie, a little background if someone's not familiar. The Menu is a 2022 American dark comedy horror film directed by Mark Mylod. It features an ensemble cast that includes Rafe Fiennes and Anya Taylor-Joy, Nicholas Hoult, Janet McTeer, Reed Birney, Judith Light, and John Leguizamo playing diners who attend his exclusive restaurant. The Menu had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 10th, 2022, and was released in the United States on November 18th, 2022 by Searchlight Pictures. The film grossed over $78 million worldwide on a budget of $30 million and has received positive reviews from critics. So before we jump into this conversation, I think it's hard not to talk about this movie without spoilers. So we're going to talk about it as if you had seen it. So if you haven't seen the movie and you're interested, I suggest you watching it before diving into this. So Todd, is The Menu something you would serve up to your guest?
As a movie, I would recommend it for people who love gastronomy or love slight horror. I'm not going to say it's complete horror, but it definitely is horror. I would say those two. So, like, for instance, my wife, Emma, would like the food part, but I don't think she would like the horror part. So I didn't recommend it to her. I told her about it, and she was like, oh, no, I'm not watching that. But people who like something a little bit more psychological, who like elite culture, I think would find it really fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like this. I don't even know if this would quite be put into the horror category, but it's kind of my type of horror. It definitely has like some shocking moments, but there was never a moment. There's not like jump scares or it is a little bit more psychological in that sense. Thriller is like a real apt discussion, but this is kind of my type of film as far as the satire that's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's I think it's funny. It's got some humor to it for sure,
Yep.
but it's got a lot of dark themes. It's not taking itself too seriously, and I found myself like a quick story. So I started it late at night, and I often have to split movies up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a movie I have a cutoff time for myself, and so it was yeah, I think it was about midnight, and I said, okay, I'm stopping this movie. And I could not fall asleep, not because I was scared or anything. I just like, it is a movie you're never sure what's going to happen next. And I couldn't fall asleep because I just was wondering what was going to happen next. And then I was just mad at myself because I think about the time I fell asleep is about the time I could have actually finished the movie. So anyway, I mean, almost that's why I just enjoyed it. I don't think it's the greatest movie of all time, but I just really enjoyed it. Just from I love that it made you think. I was entertained. It flew by, and I think it had a lot to say. But I don't think we'll be seeing the Menu 2, which I think is
Right.
great. Yeah,
yeah, and I think it's a brain worm in the fact that it gets into your brain and you can't stop thinking about it. And I think we go on the same journey through the movie as the characters, the diners, of going, okay, we're watching elite hot cuisine, and then we're going into, okay, this guy, the chef Ray Fiennes, is creepy, and then we're going into, oh, something really drastic happened. A guy got his finger cut off. Oh, was that real? Was that acting? And then we realize, oh no, this is real, along with the characters. And I think that was really great. Like, at least I went on that journey. I was like, oh, maybe he's acting. Maybe this is all performance. And that's what the food critic, which I thought was one of the funniest characters in the show, was the food critic. And just the language she used, and that she was disbelieving for a long time. Like, oh, this is performance art. This is performance art. And it took her a while to realize this was real. I was definitely there. I was like, oh, this is performance art. And then, oh no, the guy got his finger cut off. This is not performance art.
Or doesn't he even mention that you all could have probably escaped a long time ago? Like they had, even though we don't know their full histories, but we know this is probably a type of experience that they have done before, as far as this elitism type of an event. And so anyway, it really is. It's like, no, you sense that something was up from the get-go, but you stayed, like I like that aspect of it. That
absolutely right. Like they had all surrendered to his power, including the staff. The staff, surrendered to his power. They did. And at the end, they were like, okay, I'm going to die.
and almost like it was like, even though they had to surrender to him, their positions in life made them think that they were still above what was happening and that they could get out of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As far as the performances in here, I mean, I really liked, well, first off, I want to say before I get into the performances, I like movies like this that kind of are in one location. I know we go out a little bit. I was trying to do a little bit background on when they filmed this, and it wasn't quite like when the pandemic started, but it kind of feels like a pandemic film in the sense that, like, Hollywood, took everything a little bit more seriously when it came to that. So I could see that the script of this, which I read, was kind of floating around for a while. I bet that it made it intriguing to pick up, because it's like, oh, we could have a self-contained crew and cast here. But I've always liked that element of almost like, one, I'm always impressed by how much the camera work, how he moved the camera around and kept everything going despite being in one location. And I think that takes some inventiveness that's really hard to pull off. That's one reason I like it, but also kind of almost play. I don't think this could be a stage play, especially with all the close-up shots of the food and the process and all that. But I like that aspect of, like, it almost locks you in a little bit more, almost like you're in a theater seat, like it makes you feel like you can't go anywhere as well. So I like that aspect of it. So sorry, that was a lot there. Do you like these kind of, it's almost like, I know I think you grew up on this movie too, and we probably talked about, like, even though the movies are very different, it's almost like Clue, like
one of my all-time top 5 movies.
Yeah. Like it's almost like a throwback to that type of movie. Just one locale, this stellar cast, and they're all kind of playing off one another, each
Absolutely.
other. Absolutely,
it goes back to Agatha Christie novels. You're in one large mansion and someone gets murdered, and the ensemble has to figure it out.
Yeah. So now going back to the cast. Sorry, I had to kind of go with my thoughts there. Did you like Fiennes in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was aptly casted. I mean, he's Voldemort, in Harry Potter. So I look at him like, oh, I don't like you. And so I thought that was great because there's already a negative connotation of controlling, authoritarianism, evil.
Well, even going back, Schindler's List as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So can get much more evil than a Nazi.
Yeah. So I thought the casting of Ralph Fiennes was good. The guy who played, I've got it up because I don't remember all their names. Tyler, the character Tyler, so the main sort of focal point at the beginning.
Oh, Nicholas Holt's character.
Yes, Nicholas Holt. I thought that was really good.
I've always liked him a lot. He was in About a Boy. He was the little boy.
Yes, and then he was Beast, right, in the newer X-Men movies.
Yeah.
I think that's my only experience with him. I think.
Yeah, he's on that. I haven't watched it. He's on that Hulu show, The Great, also, that I've heard good things about. But yeah, he's done a lot of recent work, and everything I've seen of his, I've really enjoyed, and I thought he did a really good job with this character.
Yeah, he portrayed it. Here is, at first, this is another journey I like on this movie. You think that they're a couple. And that when they're on the dock waiting, you're like, oh, that's cute. They're a couple. She's not really a foodie. He is. He's really excited. And of course, over time, that relationship disintegrates because his relationship is really with the food, not with her. And she's just a service worker. And they finally reveal that she's an escort. And he just does it really well. He plays this person who's so intent on experiencing the food that he walks into horror knowingly. He experiences the horror, he ignores the horror while experiencing the food. So I forget which course it is, but the course where, they've just shot the guy, or the sous chef killed himself. The older man gets his ring or his finger cut off, and Nicholas Holt's character is, slurping down some bone marrow, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And he's oblivious or ignoring the horror because he's so focused on food. I just thought he portrayed that really well. A fanatic that's so fanatical that he's willing to join a cult, he literally joins a cult, basically.
Yeah. Did you like Anya Taylor-Joy in this?
I do. So I'm not a person who naturally just loves her. I watched her in Emma.
Did you watch The Queen's Gambit?
I did not watch The Queen's Gambit.
Okay.
But I thought, she did a great job. She played, a character has a very different background from anybody else. But she was the only one with a backbone. She was the only character who had boundaries. She did not let Ralph Fiennes' character breach her boundaries. And so she was not going to eat the food. She called it out. This is not food. I love the phrase, the unaccompanied accompaniments. I just thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
The use of language in this movie was great.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that concept of like her background of essentially being an escort, and probably this profession that is looked down upon from society. Yet she is the one who is like just not clueless, so to speak. Like she, as you mentioned, willing to challenge the status quo, and ultimately, the one that survives. And I liked a lot of what that has to say and how we view, positions in life, so to speak. And yeah, she's so I thinking about her, I just kind of wonder what it'd be like. She's such an interesting looking person.
Right.
She's beautiful, but also like very unique, and like but I think she was in the Northman that came out not too long ago. Everything I've seen, and she's really good, and so she's very dynamic. And I think more than anything, she really gets what the tones of the movies that she's in, like how to play them, and she really knows, just like almost very aware of the genre she's in, and she can really lock into that. She knows the playfulness behind this just as much as the seriousness behind it, for sure. What about as far as, so I'm not quite a foodie, as in the sense I don't watch a lot of cooking shows, but I watch a lot of reality shows. But regardless if you're that, but especially having this podcast and just how I've watched movies, it just has a lot to say about criticism. And I've always kept in the back of my mind, especially if I see a movie and let's say it's a horrible movie, like it's awful. I'm always like, I always try to keep in the back of my head that they made a movie. Like, how many movies have you made?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so anyway, so I always try to keep that in the back of my mind whenever I am critiquing something, because it's like, who am I to say something, and so what did you think? How did you feel about this movie and touching on that kind of critique culture, so to speak?
Yeah. So I thought, it absolutely was a critique of fetishism, and I don't mean that sexually. That is fetishism, but like you take an object, and you value it so much over its inherent worth, and it becomes almost like an idol. And so here you've got a breadless bread plate, and everyone's oohing and awing. They fetishized it, right? So they've made it, it's not about nourishment, it's not about food necessarily, it's about the experience. And so I thought it was absolutely a critique of that, where it was a critique of high art and high culture, or haute couture, however you want to say it. It was absolutely a critique of that. And it's interesting. So I was doing some research in preparation for this, and I'd heard it in the background in like my food news feed, how it cultivates news feeds for you.
Yeah.
But the restaurant that Hawthorne was based off of closed down 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Or they said they were going to shut down. This is their last season, but it's the architecture is the same. There's the kitchen is open for you to observe. Plates or seatings are $1,000 per person, and they gather the mushrooms and the food from the forest nearby, and it's in Copenhagen. It's called Noma. And so they did a press release 2 weeks ago saying this model of high-level cuisine, elite cuisine, is not sustainable. And so they're going to shut down. And so here's this movie that's critiquing and basing its, artistic look off of Noma, and Noma shutting down because they're like, this isn't working anymore. No one's going to pay $1,000, and we can't even pay our staff living wages because it's so intense, because you're out there tweezering, little bitty globules of emulsions. And so, yeah, it's just, I think this was a very strong critique of elite culture.
Oh yeah, for sure. Did you like how they put up the courses on screen?
Oh, I
Like
loved it.
actually,
I loved
yeah,
it. I loved it.
yeah. I liked it too. I think maybe some people could see it as being a little too kitschy, but like as I mentioned, I'm not like a huge like food person, so I liked it because it's almost like spelling out a little bit more of like the presentation of everything. This is it's being presented to us as viewers, just like as somebody sitting in
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
chairs.
We're offered the menu, right? We
Right,
are
right.
offered the menu. And that is a character in the story is the menu.
Yeah.
And it just devolves into horror.
I have a question for you. This will really, if we haven't already, this is definitely a spoiler part of this movie. But I want to ask your thoughts about the end of this and the whole cheeseburger scene, which
Mhm.
actually like it shows you how much I'm like. y- You might scoff at me, but to me, that hamburger looked like the cheeseburger looked like the best thing for
No,
me. Yeah.
absolutely. 100%. So like, yeah, I say I'm a foodie. I'm not that level of a foodie. Like I don't want deconstructed condiments. I want bread with really good butter,
Yeah.
And so that cheeseburger looked amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, the movie kind of suggests that Margot Anya Taylor's Joy as character kind of taps in to the chef's like, for lack of better words, like mental illness,
Mhm.
almost as far as the preparing this cheeseburger for her as her way to get out. But do you think he was also purposely getting her out?
I absolutely think that's a valid interpretation. Like I think she was not supposed to be there. He said she's one of us, right? Isn't that how they ended it?
Yeah,
Like she was
yeah.
like, or he said, "You're one of us. You're part of the kitchen staff, not the
Hmm.
clientele.
Hmm.
You're in service industry." And I think he was letting her escape.
Yeah, and as I was thinking about it, like when he sends her off to go out and get, I forgot what did she go out and get?
The barrel that had the
Yeah,
explosives.
yeah, the barrel. Like I think inherently he knew that she was a curious person. She wouldn't just do that one task, and
Hmm.
I think he knew she would find the radio and get the boat there. That's just kind of how I saw it. And I kind of saw that scene at the end of them kind of playing that little game, so to speak, of him prepping the cheeseburger and her asking, for it to go and stuff like that. I felt like that was like kind of an understanding, as you mentioned, she's part of them. And so I think he almost in a way knew, it was a way for her to at least get even a boat there to escape. But that's how I saw it. I
Absolutely.
didn't know if you saw it that way.
And it gave the chef's character one last time to cook what he loved,
Hmm.
which is, being a short order cook.
Yeah.
And so it allowed his final act um, before the graham crackers and marshmallows to cook his joy one last time.
Yeah. And I think that plays into like, I don't think it's just regulated to if you're an artist or if you're a creative type. I think it's also if you are any head of any kind of organization. And I think almost if you talk to anybody, they'd be like, "Yeah, I really enjoyed the days where I got to do this." Kind of
Mhm.
going back to the like basis of it, and you as you get older and you get to a certain level, things, importance, stress, all those things just get bubble up where it's just like, as you mentioned, like, I just want the cheeseburger.
Yeah. I actually made burgers this past week because of that scene. I was like, Emma, I'm going to make cheeseburgers.
Now, in all seriousness, does Emma still have all her fingers, Todd?
Yes, thankfully.
Okay, good. Good. You didn't get too extreme with the
I did
cooking or
not. She didn't
anything.
try to escape.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, is there anything you want to hit on in the movie?
Yeah, I would say in terms of other characters, I loved the food critic character. She was my favorite.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
thought she was the funniest.
Did you watch
And
Ozark?
I didn't. Is she
Oh,
in there?
okay. Yeah, she plays a pretty prominent role in a couple of seasons there. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's one of those actresses that I recognize. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen you, but I couldn't place where I've seen her.
Yeah.
But I just thought her wordplay was masterful. The way they wrote her as this ostentatious, pretentious, arrogant, food critic that's belittling her magazine editor, and they're arguing about word usage. And she has those big, thick reading glasses that she takes on and off and it just adds to the character. Her body language was very almost rigid. She was my favorite one. And so when they're arguing about like the word biome, to talk about, the ocean, I had to look up the word thalassic when she was like, oh, it's very thalassic, and the editor's like, oh yeah, I thought of that too, but I didn't say it. Or he said something like that, and they of course know what the word thalassic meant, but we common people don't use that word, to talk about the ocean. And so I loved her character. I love wordplay. I love subtle linguistic humor, and I thought it was great.
Yeah. Even though they're different films, almost similar, Glass Onion that came out, you saying that wordplay kind of reminds me of Edward Norton's character in there, who's essentially making up words to make it sound like he's smart,
Absolutely. But in her case, like, to use the word thalassic, you have to have a classical Greek education, so she's not, Edward Norton was making it up because he was stupid. She's using that word because she assumes she's only talking to elite people, and only elite people are going to read her editorial or her review in Savor magazine. And so it amped up the pretentiousness for her character. And so, I just loved her character.
Yeah, I really liked John Leguizamo in this as well. I thought he did really well. I was kind of reading, he based a lot of his character on Steven Seagal. I thought that was interesting. and then always just like Judith Light. I know she's actually probably more well known for her stage work and like on Broadway and stuff. But I mean, I grew up on Who's the Boss, so I always like seeing her.
Absolutely.
Movie musings.
This movie musing segment's going to be very food focused.
Okay.
So here's a couple of questions for you. What is the best meal that you've ever had at a restaurant?
Oh gosh, at a restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
This is going to make me sound pretentious. I'm so sorry. But this summer we were in Italy, and my in-laws gave us a night off with from kids. And so they kept the kids, and we drove into this hill town called Orvieto in Italy. So it's this beautiful medieval town up on a hill, like a plateau, a mesa, and just ancient buildings. And so there was a restaurant there called Charlie. And, it was upscale, but had sort of classic Italian food. So it had pizza, but I ordered the risotto. And I kid you not, I mean, it was the best risotto I've ever had. It was very simple. It was a chicken stock base with a Parmesan finish, but it was just perfect. And I think also the atmosphere of us eating outside in a town with my wife. But here was this simple bowl of risotto. It was beautiful. I mean, it was just magical.
Oh yeah, no.
And so I would say absolutely that's the best restaurant meal I've ever had.
Yeah, for sure. No, I know completely. Even though I've necessarily I've traveled a little bit internationally, but even though maybe from a food perspective, I mean, it was definitely good. It wouldn't make a magazine or whatever, but I mean, I associate those things. I remember being in Vietnam and having the best shrimp I have ever had. Like, I mean, you associate food with settings, which this movie plays off of quite a bit. Mine, I can't even remember the name of the restaurant, but it was during our honeymoon in Vegas, and it was actually part of this this already, I'm sure like foodies would be like scoff at this because it was a fixed menu, but it was like it was through the Encore at Wynn, and included a show with a meal, but it was in their country club because they have I don't know if they call it country club, but it faces their golf course. But it was it was this steak. Whitney and I just love good, well-made steaks, but the way they had the steak, it was like surrounded almost like by a moat of like mashed potatoes, and the gravy kind of like seeped into the meat to bring out the flavor. Oh, I still think about that now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my second favorite, and this is like my only brush against elite dining, is this makes me sound pretentious. Please, I've gone overseas like twice. So like one was Italy, one was France. So 5.5 years ago, we went to France, and my wife and I, there was this little village, and there were 2 restaurants in this tiny little village of like 500 people. One of them had a Michelin star. So it was a big deal, you know, like elite level cuisine. The restaurant next to it was the old Michelin starred chef's sous chef. He broke off and started his own restaurant. Not a Michelin star because it was newer, but a chef trained under a Michelin star. And so we went to that lesser one without the Michelin star. And, you know, I had to get out my phone to translate the menu. But it was beautiful. It was like amazing food, like perfectly prepared, good portions. So it wasn't like this very elite, like small little globules, but it was just awesome. So I'd say that, yeah, that's one of my second favorites.
Yeah. What is your favorite meal to cook?
Oh gosh. I love making some like classical French stews. So beef bourguignon takes all day. The chicken dish coq au vin, which is old rooster and red wine, but of course we don't have old rooster in Texas. We just go get chicken from HEB. But I love it, like long, slow meats that have been braised over hours, and it always has carrots and onions and celery, and it's just this wave of meat and aromatics and red wine, and it's just like, it's heaven. It is heaven to me.
What? You need to make that for me.
I will.
I'll make you the Kraft macaroni cheese from a box.
I love it. I love it.
So I promise I wrote this question down before you use this word. So
Okay.
I think it's funny that this is my question for you. But what is something that you are pretentious about in life?
You know, I'm never persnickety, Nathan. Okay, what's something I'm pretentious about? Yeah, I'll relate it to food. Okay, I'm going to relate it to food. Place settings.
Okay.
It bugs me to no end. Even if you're just sitting at the dining room table with your family, have a proper place setting. I can't stand it when people just throw knives and forks on the table and expect people to grab. And so I'm pretty pretentious about that.
Maybe you should never come to our house for a meal. No, I'm just kidding.
No, like a family in-law member. I'm going to say that. I'm not going to say who, but they will, when they're at my house, they will just throw silverware in the middle with a pile of napkins on top. And I always go after that person and like put the forks and knives and spoons in the right place with the napkins. And I don't know if I'm making that person mad, but I refuse to have it just jumbled on the table.
That's funny. Did you happen to see The Fabelmans?
I didn't. No, not yet.
This doesn't ruin the movie, but an aspect of the mom character in there is that they always use a throwaway tablecloth. They use paper plates and all that. So at the end of the meal, they literally can just bundle it up like a big knapsack and just toss it in the trash.
Oh, that's pretty efficient.
Yeah, it's super efficient. That's hilarious. Well, thanks for answering those. I know I threw you on the hot seat there. So, is the Menu a movie that you would recommend?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. I told my in-laws to watch this, and even after I did, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that because of some of the scenes in it. But I do think some those horror aspects might turn off some people, but
Mhm.
I do think if they give it a chance, I don't think they're in there just for blood's sake, so to speak.
Right.
It's really, I think the satire of the story, it's really trying to bring, it's saying a lot with those scenes, and they could have really gone deep with some of the blood and gore with it.
Yeah.
And for this type of story, I thought it was kind of at the right level. But
Yeah, I would say the people who should not watch this film. So who I wouldn't recommend it to, people who don't like horror and people who are not at all interested in elite culture. And so whether that's cinema, art, film, food, like if you are already looking at high level art and going, that's stupid, I don't like that, I think their critique is going to be like, yeah, of course. I think this movie is for people who actually do like some elite culture, who like, high level cinema, who go to art museums, who like to think about food creatively. And then I think then the critique is you'll be receptive to that critique,
yeah, and
I've thought about it I've already used this movie as an example in class. So for those of y'all listening, so I'm a sociology professor and I teach classes in social class and poverty. And so I teach this idea of elite culture. And I've thought about using this in class as an example because it's such a good critique of it.
And I also like almost flipping it as like, in a way, you feel like these people are getting what they deserve, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think that also says a lot about yourself when you start going into that of like, why would I want, any human being to, be subject to this type of torture, so to speak, so I think it says a lot to what we even think as human beings that the elitists deserve to be told. Does it take chopping off fingers to get a point across about their nature? So I think it has a lot to say about that. So it's just challenging us as a whole.
Yeah, and when I was watching it, I was connecting it a little bit to the Hunger Games. The idea of there is an elite group that is so absurd. We're at the level of absurdity in this movie of breadless bread plates, or you're eating the ocean because it's on rocks and snowy seawater. That's the level of such high elite culture that it's now absurd. And I thought about the Hunger Games because they portray that much more strongly, much more overtly. But this idea of a critique against the absurdity of the elite.
Recommendations.
So I didn't prep you for this, Todd. I apologize, but we have a new segment this year called Recommendations, where we each give something that we might be reading or listening to or watching, both film or TV, or just something you're really enjoying. Is there anything lately that you have been indulging or liking?
Yeah. I'm going to go two things. So one, I'm reading for the first time anything by Isaac Asimov, the classical science fiction writer. Never read anything by him. And so I'm reading the I, Robot short stories right now. And because I've seen the movies, I've seen other, I, Robot, all the movies that were based off his work. And I'm loving it. The characters in the short stories are actually our age. They were born in 1981, 1982. And so it's just fun to see how someone in 1950 imagined what we would live through. And of course, some things are correct, some things are not correct. We don't have a lot of robots, but we do have AI. So that's been cool. And then in the word indulge here. So on my commute, so every day I drive about 50 minutes. And so I do a lot of Audible. And I'm reading the Prince Harry book just for fun because I needed a brain break from some of my more academic reading. And it is a hate letter to newspapers and the media and the paparazzi. It is a letter of grieving for a mom,
Mhm.
and I'm not gonna say I recommend it. Like, if you're interested in royal family, go for it. I think it's standard reading. But if you're not interested, yeah, you can skip it. But I've just been enjoying. I've enjoyed hearing about the behind the scenes. Like, and it honestly makes me sad. It's not like a happy story. And so it makes me sad. So when I get to work, I'm sad. But that, I would say, that's one of my indulgences, because it's it's bubblegum literature or bubblegum reading. But that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, we've been working through their series, Harry and Meghan's series on Netflix. It's kind of it's a good. It tends to be Sunday morning when we start watching it. It's like a good kind of lazy watching type of thing, but we haven't yet been just super enthused to finish it.
Yep.
But I was listening to a podcast I really like called The Press Box. And they talk about media stuff, but they were talking about this book, and the host on there, he's very well read, loves books and stuff. And what he said about Harry's book was that he was like, it's just entertaining. It's just good. He said like the writing itself or all that kind of stuff, you can kind of quabble with, but he's like, man, like he definitely is going for it. So he said just from an entertaining read that it was a really good book.
Oh, absolutely. And, you can tell it's ghostwritten. I mean, it has to be ghostwritten.
Right. Yeah.
Because he goes on and on about he was a bad student in school. He hated Shakespeare. His dad loved Shakespeare. That was always a source of shame for him. He got horrible grades when he got to Eton. They're like, well, you're here because you're a prince, not because you're smart. And then throughout the book, he's like quoting Shakespeare and classical Greek mythology and all these things. And I'm like, you did not know that quote existed. And so the writing is at an academic level that's a little bit higher than what he even says he's at.
Yeah.
And so, but it is entertaining. It is entertaining. I just got through the part of the frostbite. I'm not going to, if you know about the frostbite, but I'm not going to talk about it on this podcast.
Yeah, I still want to keep that clean rating on this podcast. Yeah, quick recommendation for me. It just started. We were a big fan of the show on NBC, but American Auto. It just started its second season, and so enjoyed the first one from the season. Let's see if they can keep it up. But it's from the creators of Superstore. So if you ever watched that,
I love Superstore.
Yeah, same tone, like workplace comedy. The cast is great, but we were excited to see it, but also because a Baylor friend of ours who's an actress out in LA, she was in this premiere episode of the second season. So Catherine Everett. So anyway, she was a lead in my short film. I'm sure she hopes that film is buried somewhere. But anyway, so it was fun to see her on that. But that's a show I think people should catch up. But if you like The Office, anything like that type of humor, you'll really like it. Talk about dark satirical humor, kind of go along with the menu. This show is it. So I appreciate you. I'm glad you watched this movie, and we could talk about it. It's fun to have you on solo this time. You were with the group last time, so
I love it. Thanks for having me. This has been great, and what a cool movie to talk about.
Yeah. So next week we're going to jump back into the 50 best rom-coms, and we're going to talk about number 35 on the list, Crazy Stupid Love, with all-star cast, including Ryan Gosling, Emma Stone, Steve Carell. So I don't think I've seen that one since the theater. So that'll be a really fun one to revisit. Have you seen that movie?
Long time ago.
Yeah. But I remember really liking it. So that'll be a fun one to explore and see how it ranks on the rom-com list. So remember to visit moviesarelife.com for episode reviews and more. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to our podcast. This helps us discover new listeners. We're also on all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I actually started posting these episodes on YouTube. So if that's a way you consume podcast or anything audio, you can check us out on YouTube. So anyway, thanks again, Todd, and thanks everyone for listening. And remember to always tip your wait staff. Have a good one, man.
Hey, thanks, Nathan.